Arlo and Spot become friends. Arlo and Spot find Dino with birds around him. Arlo and Spot meet T-Rex. Arlo and Spot meet raptors. They meet T-Rex again. They meet raptors again. Rinse and repeat, and then the movie ends.
Hello and welcome to Spoiler Alert. I'm your host Ned, and joining me as ever is my co-host Kyle.
How you doing, everyone?
And no special guest this time today because no one likes us officially.
And I don't think anybody's seen The Good Dinosaur, so we don't have any excuse.
Yeah. This is probably going to be titled The Sequel Era or something because most of these films are sequels that we're going to be talking.
It's a bit of a weird situation because we're starting to get around this period that a lot of people are very mixed on when it comes to Pixar, because while most of these are considered good and even great films, I think we're getting to this point now where there's becoming a bit of Pixar fatigue, and people just want a bit more original projects. There was quite a bit of original stuff that came out around this point, and some that are genuinely brilliant stuff, but you can sort of see where Pixar was sort of shifting to want to make continuations of their previous work rather than, what they were always known for, to try and just create some really good original stories.
Yeah, exactly. Most of these films, compared to the ones we talked about last time, they really underperformed at the box office, and it was really.
No, I wouldn't say so. A lot, there's Toy Story 3 and Finding Dory in particular actually crossed $1 billion at the box office, and everything else still made good profits. There's only one film in particular that underperformed, and it's Pixar's first official bomb, which was The Good Dinosaur.
Yeah, but should we just maybe get into it?
Yeah, I suppose it's right, actually.
Mm-hmm. So we'll start off strong, probably one of the strongest ones on the list.
Toy Story 3 is just so beautiful, and it's kind of been a long time coming as well, because if Toy Story 2 was a film about Woody and many of the others having to come to terms with Andy, knowing that Andy is going to grow up and eventually forget about them, Toy Story 3 is probably the dark aftermath of all that.
Yeah, it sort of wraps everything up quite nicely, which I don't know why they're doing a Toy Story 4, because Toy Story 3 is...
It's a bit of a weird situation because, well, the way that the movie ends it's done in such a very lovely and poignant way that I can't see how they could continue from that. I know that we had multiple Toy Story shorts after Toy Story 3 came out, like Toy Story Time Forgotten, Toy Story A Terror and stuff like that, but in terms of just telling an overarching story over 3 films, it's seamless, honestly. It's probably one of the... It could be regarded as one of the greatest film trilogies of all time because of that.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason why Toy Story is the series that got 3 series, and I don't think it was just because of toys.
It's also just the fact that they're just sort of genuinely good characters that people can relate to a lot, and at the end of the day, there's so much heart in these films as well. They always just find this way to seep into your skin and just make you grow so attached to them. And it's really baffling, especially when you really come to consider that Toy Story was based off a pretty childish idea that could have went super wrong if not put in the right hands. It's so uncanny, but still works on so many levels.
Yeah, and this is probably one of the saddest.
If anything, it's probably also one of their most grown up as well. It feels like their first film in a while where they really looked into adulthood, because the movie is essentially about Andy going off to college for the first time, and that obviously leaves the toys in a pretty bad spot because they don't know what's going to happen in their life, whether they're going to be stored up in an attic or sent to a daycare. They end up getting sent to a daycare where they actually seem to fit in really well. But but the film at its core is essentially about growing up and moving on from things. It's just told from a different perspective with the toys. And I suppose when you're a kid that grew up perhaps with the first Toy Story and you sort of aged your way up into Toy Story 3, I am not shocked that, heartstrings are tugged by a lot of young adults when they saw this for the first time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of danger in this film as well. It's just it is beautiful.
It's one of the most perilous by a long shot, and a lot of that comes through the new villain of the film, who's named Lotso, who's the head of this daycare. And he has another twist villain, probably a twist villain number 300 as far as Pixar's concerned, but it's just the way that we're introduced to this character and how he's just like, he comes across as very warm and fuzzy and really likable, but as his motivations slowly start to seep in when we learn more about him, he's not only just a genuinely great villain, but a lot of his actions lead to a lot of really dark and pretty damn suspenseful moments, even for Pixar.
Yeah, totally. And one scene that really sticks out in my head is that scene when they're in the incinerator and they're just basically accepting their death because it's inevitably going to happen.
It's such an unbelievably dark moment because it's already really dark on its own that the toys are basically accepting their fate and they're basically all joining hands. But even the way that the scene was introduced when they actually thought Lotso was going to save them by basically pushing the stop button up there, but he straight out abandons them, just claiming, "Who's your kid now, Sheriff?" And top 10 anime portrayals, anybody?
Definitely. But yeah, and I just love the ending of this film as well when Andy just gives his toys away because he's realizing, yes, I'm growing up now. It's time for me to just leave the past behind. As you said, it's the entire point.
I love how they actually really did take the time to actually set the scene perfectly, because you can tell that this is the first time that Andy was actually thinking about these toys, probably ever since he was a kid. And it's a film, like, his character is sort of reminiscing about, memories of good old past. And I think it's just set up perfectly. Even the kid character, Bonnie, I would have sort of criticised the movie a little bit if she just came out of nowhere, but because she was already introduced beforehand, earlier on in the daycare, and, we were even introduced to a lot of these new characters, which are toys like Mr. Pricklepants, she even has like a Totoro plush of all things. Like, it gets away with quite a lot, but in a good way. And I think when you really look at the ending and what it just says about growing up and accepting that you're moving on, but you're never gonna forget the things about your youth that are so special to you, it's a film that has impacted me a lot the first time I saw it. I think it was probably one of the first movies I genuinely cried at, actually.
Yeah, it's a very, very strong film. I think it's impacted a lot of people, really. I think a lot of people, it just stuck. So many scenes are so iconic and stick with you.
In terms of when you rank them up against the other Toy Story films, I guess I could consider 2 to be the better film, if not for the fact that it was already looking at very similar ideas earlier on and in a bit more of a wider ranging way. Toy Story 3 is more of an aftermath of what Toy Story 2 already established, but that isn't a bad thing because there was still so much to learn and so much to really think about afterwards. For a film trilogy about toys, there was weirdly so much to take from it and, learn and reflect on in life. And if that does not make an absolutely fantastic movie trilogy, then I don't know what does.
Yeah, a very simple concept about toys coming to life made an entire trilogy on it, and all 3 are nothing short of wonderful. Like, they're genuinely beautiful.
And you know what? I'm happy about that. Now, how about we go from one of the best Pixar sequels to
one of
absolute
the worst.
rock bottom.
The worst film, and probably the only bad film in Pixar series. Do we have to talk?
If it means I don't have to watch it again, I suppose. Oh boy. If you didn't catch the last episode, me and Ned actually have some... We actually like Cars 1. We both agree that it has problems and it's very flawed, but there was still quite a lot to like about it. Cars 2 is a different story.
Cars 2, hell no. Yeah, whereas Cars 1 is probably quite underrated in a way. There's a lot there to like that people... Yeah, not true for Cars 2.
Oh god.
Cars 1 essentially is about learning to maybe slow down a bit. It's not all about the... It's more important to be a good person. Cars 3 is... I mean, we'll get to it a bit later, but Cars 3 is basically just saying, you're getting a bit outdated, it's time to maybe move on and maybe try and find enjoyment in other things. Cars 2, fuck it with...
I mean, red flag should have already been up if it wasn't for the fact that Mater was the main character this time other than Lightning. And Mater was actually a decently funny character in Cars 1, but if stuff like Planet Sheen and Minions have taught us anything, you should never make the comic relief your main character in a movie, because...
There's no substance to them at all.
And it's not only that, but Mater is extremely unlikable in this movie. If we have to get into story in this one, if you can call it that... Essentially, Lightning McQueen goes into a World Grand Prix where he's going against many races all over the world. And to put it short, it's all interwoven into this really dumb spy mission, which involves a group of bad guys trying to make gasoline obsolete with this new all-in-all fuel, and how, you know, they're using a machine to blow it up, and what does this have to do with anything? And for some reason, Mate is interwoven with it, and people think he's a spy, even though he so obviously isn't. And what was this movie trying to say?
My god, this film. I just like... Every other film Pixar has released really is about something, you know. Most of them are about maybe kids leaving their home for the first time, or growing up or something. Cars 2 is just literally, let's just create a film because the first one was successful to sell toys. That's the only reason this film exists.
Also a film that really made me lose any credibility I had for John Lasseter, because there's already been a lot of bad news regarding John Lasseter in the press over the past year because of what happened in terms of sexual harassment allegations and all that, but if he brought anything to Pixar, it's that he brought a sense of, you know, considering what a good story is at Pixar, and he was the director of Cars 2. He only likes doing Cars films because I guess it supports his motor fetish. But, oh god, John Lasseter, what have you done? I don't want to talk about this movie.
Yeah, there's not much more to really say. Nothing really goes on. It's just not a good film in the slightest. Let's be honest here.
Peeps, Cars 2 sucks. Don't watch it. Moving on.
Moving on to better things. Well, slightly better.
Brave is another very weird one. It's a film that's kind of has a couple of firsts for Pixar, because not only is it its first movie from a female director, it's been directed by Brenda Chapman, who was once the director at DreamWorks. She did The Prince of Egypt. But it's also Pixar's first fairy tale. And that's also kind of the core of its problem, because fairy tales and stuff like that are Disney animation's shtick, and that's what gives them their identity. Pixar attempting at doing a fairy tale is already gonna confuse quite a lot of people, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that. It's obviously, you know, get more in touch with her mother, which is it's a nice concept, but I don't know. It's just,
I mean, to be fair, the whole mother-daughter relationship in Brave is done quite well, if you ask me, because I think there's a lot of heart to it. I think if you ever had any siblings in your life, you can always sort of see the bond that a daughter and their mother always have, and that is the overall emotional core for the story, and I guess it works well. The biggest problem with Brave, though, that really holds it back is just how absolutely unoriginal it is, because the overall story is how Merida accidentally turns her mother into a bear and needs to find a way to change her back. But when you see that it's so obviously inspired by a lot of classic Disney fairy tales, it takes a lot of story beats from stuff like Brother Bear, and even stuff like Tangled, and even a lot of stuff from the Disney Renaissance. And that isn't a bad thing, but I always saw Pixar as this company that had their own unique identity and was different from the musical-y fairy tale stuff that Disney Animation Studios do. And, well, I don't see the point in doing this. You can keep the mother-daughter message and dynamic in this thing, but at least give it a different setting or a coat of paint.
It does feel more like a Disney movie than anything else they've done. It's their first, I think, princess film.
Merida's technically a Disney princess, so I guess that's true.
It's also the first film in the Pixar theory, which I know you have very strong feelings.
Oh, God. I might as well just go into a mini rant for a moment, but if anybody thinks all the stuff in the Pixar theory is true, don't. It's bullshit. Many of the directors at Pixar think it's bullshit, and if they think it's bullshit, then why should I think it's true?
It's just cool to theorize sometimes, and just be like, yeah.
It's probably more fun than discussing this movie.
Hey, it's not a bad film, not at all.
I can still sing some praises for it. I mean, for one thing, the animation is absolutely gorgeous. Probably some of the best at Pixar, period. The backgrounds, they're very realistic. They're very lush. A lot of the character animation's really good. I like how it finds this cool way of mixing a lot of very humanistic body actions with a lot of cartoony stuff, especially when you introduce these tribes that are trying to win Merida's hand at marriage. That leads to some pretty funny moments. There is stuff to like about Brave, it's just that it doesn't really do too much to impress. And that isn't a bad thing. I'd consider Brave a pretty good movie. But is it a great movie or a Pixar movie? Nah. I mean, it isn't a bad thing, but, they should have done it at Disney Animation then. Oh well. Should we dive back into Disney Pixar sequel territory again?
Why not, Monsters University?
We already had some praises for Monsters, Inc., and just like Brave, it's another first for Pixar because it's their first prequel this time around, because this movie is essentially about Mike Wazowski and Sully going to college and how they first met and how a friendship was bonded, and how Mike Wazowski even was actually training to initially become a scarer, just like Sully did in the original movie. And with a prequel, there is always a lot of risks with prequels because we already know what's happening after that as just general audiences. So you're always going to need to find a way to make the story interesting and at least have some sort of suspense and surprise. And that does, unfortunately, bog down Monsters University a little bit, but in terms of the other Pixar films that we got on before, I'd say this is an improvement, and I'd say it's a pretty damn good movie anyway.
I know this film gets a lot of hate. I don't quite understand why, but I do genuinely think that they do a very good job of this, because obviously, as you said before, we do know what happens afterwards. We do know that they're good friends, they're colleagues, but really, what this film does really well is showing how they go from being two very, very different kinds of people to where they are now, and I genuinely like what they've done here. It's a very sort of creative thing to do, I think.
I think a lot of that comes in full circle during the final act of the movie, where Sully and Mike are just together next to this little lake, and I can credit this movie for anything, is that it actually had the balls to actually tell a message that most films are always afraid of telling, and that's about failure, because the movie takes a dramatic as hell shift when Mike actually finds out that Sully tampered with this machine, which which basically made them win these scaring games that they were participating in by complete default, because Sully revealed that he didn't have any confidence in Mike, because most people admit that even though he's extremely knowledgeable about the craft of scaring, he just lacks one thing that can actually make him good at it, and that's just the fact that he ain't scary. And if this ending actually teaches us anything, it's that it's about us having to learn to accept that we've failed, and that's something that is very difficult for a lot of people, and it's something that a lot of people can relate to. But it's even interwoven with how Sully's opening up to Mike, and how, yeah, he did come across as this really cocky asshole beforehand, but that's because he's just a really scared man. He has to live up to the legacy of his father, who's one of the top scarers around, and it's I think it might single-handedly be one of the best Pixar moments, period, even if everything else beforehand is just good as it is.
It's a very, very unique kind of message, but one I think needs to be told, is that sometimes no matter what, you are going to fail, and sometimes you may not be good enough, and it's a really, really scary lesson, I guess, to learn.
But it's one that feels very essential. And even I even liked how the movie ended on a happy note anyway, because even though Mike never became a scarer, he still managed to land his way in a Monsters Incorporated anyway. And, you know, both him and Sully obviously worked their way up. They started off as mailmen, and then they eventually got the attention of Water News, and then Sully got trained to be a scarer at Monsters Incorporated, and Mike's obviously now his white right-hand man, working with him on the floor each day. Obviously setting up the events for the first movie, but I like how it ended in that sort of way, because even though it did have to tell a very harsh message, they still said that there are always opportunities open for you, even if it's never the right path that you intend anyway. Because I think it's still fair to say that Mike is still happy for everything he's accomplished by the end of it anyway.
Yeah. I do actually really like that about actually the whole you know, they're always hiring in the mailroom, you know. Like, sometimes you've got to take the long way around, but it doesn't really matter as long as you get there in the end, really. And this film really does teach a lot of messages that really aren't taught in that many of the films, really.
But even before all that stuff even kicks in, at the centre of Monsters University, it's basically a 90s college film like Animal House if Pixar decided to make it their own way. And I will even say this movie, in many ways, kind of got me excited at the concept of university at quite a young age, because the way that they establish MU as like this really grand place with a lot of great, huge architecture, and the concept of like fraternities and stuff like that. It's stuff that, tough shit, mate. You're in the UK. This is all the American stuff. But I think the movie does a great job at just sort of building this world very similar to what the first Monsters, Inc. did, because they still sort of looked in and further explored the way that the craft of scaring's built, the way that you have to study each kid and what their fears are, and the way to approach each child every time you're on the floor. I mean, this movie really buys you into the art of scaring, and it really does make you get Mike Wazowski and why he's so unbelievably passionate about it.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next film? Because I haven't really got too much more to say about this.
I mean, I don't either. It's a good movie, not a great one, but it's quite an important one, honestly.
Okay, here's one, and I know you're going to just gush about for ages and ages before I stop you, Inside Out.
I want to level with you people. This is my favourite Pixar movie, period. It comes from Pete Docter, whose last film was Up, and not only do I think it's a really beautiful movie, a funny movie, a wonderfully imaginative movie, but it's a movie that's helped me a lot. It's one of the best films I can think of which deals with mental health in such a down-to-earth and mature way. Do you want to start? Because I'm probably going to ramble on for a bit.
Yeah, I think when your film gets played as a way to sort of help people with mental health sort of get to grips with what they're feeling. You really are doing something so right, because I know that this film is actually played in, I think, children's hospitals and stuff sometimes to help children get a...
It's helped a lot of kids with autism because of the way that it actually explains emotions.
Yeah, exactly. Like, when your film's being used for something like that, then that's when you know you've done something pretty damn right.
But Inside Out isn't really just about that. At the end of the day, it still has to tell a story, and a really good one at that. Because in many ways, Inside Out is essentially a story about Joy, the lead emotion of this 11-year-old girl named Riley, having to come to terms with the fact that all the other emotions are just as important as she is, because when you're a kid, you always get this idea that being happy is the only healthy way to live. And that all links into Joy's arc in the movie, because Inside Out, at its core, is a really good coming-of-age tale in both regards, both on the outside and in the inside, because it's about a girl having to come to terms with the fact that she's moving away from a home that she's known for so long, and it's all interwoven into a pretty epic plot, which is about Joy having to come to terms with the fact that sadness is just as essential as she is, and she doesn't know any better than Riley does, because she isn't at an age where she's fully matured yet. And there's so much to really get with this movie. There's so much to take in.
Yeah, I do think the whole, joy isn't the only emotion you can feel. It's okay to feel other emotions. It's normal. It's just it is a really sad thing to say, but it's something that needs to be said, really.
It's also just really good that that Inside Out is also just... it's like, I've always praised world building in Pixar movies a lot, especially with Monsters Inc. in particular, but Inside Out takes it to a completely different level, because not only do they have to sort of try to create a visual representation of the mind in a very visually interesting way, but they also have to make sure that it's also realistic and logical to how the mind functions as it is. The way that they create memories. What's the difference between short-term memories and long-term memories? How do we lose memories? How do we forget things? What's the subconscious? What are the ideas of imaginary friends, dreams? There's so much to seep in here. Even a character that's introduced in the movie named Bing Bong, who's an imaginary friend, that character in general is almost an entire metaphor about growing up, and how sometimes we have to sacrifice things in order to grow up, and that leads into probably the most emotional Pixar moment for me, period, and that's when Bing Bong sacrifices himself to save Joy.
That moment when Bing Bong dies is just... it is so depressing. Oh, man, like...
I'm never a crier at movies, even Toy Story 3, which only got, little tears out of me. I think Inside Out might have been the first movie, period, where I actually properly bawled at the movie. It's a movie that's helped me in so many ways, because I've a person who's always had a few mental health problems before, but Inside Out just sort of helped me come to terms with things. It's a movie it's easily their most mature film, but at the same time, it's a film that feels essential. It's the first Pixar movie where I dare even say it's important.
Yeah, this is absolutely because all the other Pixar films, they're great for the most part. But really, at the end of the day, they are really just films. But man, Inside Out is just something else entirely.
It's a film that I put a notch up before The Incredibles, because even though I think The Incredibles is a near perfect film in almost every conceivable way, Inside Out just left a bit of a different impact on me, and that's just because there was so much that I could emotionally resonate with. There's so much that I could connect to. I love its world building, I love its humour, I love its characters, and I just love that it approaches such such deep and such dark subject matters, especially when we link it into mental health, but does it in a very fun, imaginative, and very progressive way. It's a film that's helped me a lot. I'm sure it's helped a lot of others a lot. I can accept it as a really good movie on its own as well, but when you put it all together, it will remain my favourite Pixar movie forever, I guess.
Yeah, I can see it coming from it. It's probably in my top 5 as well. What more can we say? It's amazing. Watch it if you haven't. If you have watched it again because it's that good. So yeah, should we move on to The Good Dinosaur then?
Oh, The Good Dinosaur. Oh no. I'm not saying that because I think it's a bad movie. I think it's an alright film on its own if you just judge it as not a Pixar movie but just any other movie. But if this movie did anything, it was Pixar's very first financial disappointment, and I always thought Pixar were unstoppable. Even with shit like Cars 2, at least they could still profit off it because, Cars is a franchise that was made to sell toys, but The Good Dinosaur had nothing else going for it. Pixar just stuck to their guns and made the movie they wanted to make, and for some reason it didn't catch on and people just didn't watch it.
It really was a really sort of financial flop. I don't know why. It wasn't a bad film in the slightest. It just didn't really sell at all. No one really cared about it at all.
I don't necessarily blame them because the story is probably one of the most meh and bare bones that Pixar has ever created, but there's still a lot of heart to this movie. I think there are good elements to it, but it's definitely in my top 5 worst, mostly just because it's pretty bland and kind of boring.
There's a lot of Pixar films that do what this film does but better. I think that's fair to say.
I mean, what makes this movie work the most is just the relationship between Arlo and this cave boy named Spot, and I suppose that they do share a good dynamic, but if you've seen Toy Story 1 or any other buddy film, you've seen this story before. But even the overall concept of the movie feels a little bit lame because the movie takes place in an alternate universe where the meteorite that was supposed to kill all the dinosaurs accidentally misses the planet completely. And there's so many awesome possibilities you could do with a concept in a world such as that, but no, it's just your average prehistoric world. It's just that dinosaurs are a bit more evolved than the dominant species and they farm.
Yeah. They farm, and the caveman baby is a pest trying to steal from them. I don't know what they were going for with this at all, but yeah.
I mean, that's the most unfortunate problem with the movie, because there are good aspects to it, and if I can actually give the movie some credit, it's the way that it actually approaches death. Because Arlo's dad actually dies very early on in the movie in a very dark scene. And even one scene, which is one of my favourites in the film, when Spot and Arlo are basically camping out somewhere for the night, and it's a scene that's mostly comprised of no dialogue, but it's about them using sticks and basically drawing a circle around them to describe what their family is. And when Spot uses sticks to show who his mum and dad were, he places both of the sticks down and basically buries them up in the sand, obviously indicating that his parents have also died. And you know what? It's a beautiful moment because not only is it told in a very visually intriguing way, but the way that they're actually approaching a subject matter about this, especially when you take into consideration that these two characters are just kids. Good props, Pixar. Good props.
That scene was probably the best, I think, in the entire film. It was genuinely beautiful to watch.
I mean, my personal favourite scene in the entire film is right at the end when this cave family actually find Spot. And it was at that point when Arlo had to sort of realise that he obviously had to give up Spot because he was now with a group of people that, he knows that he will love and he will trust. And it's just this one scene with no dialogue and just some really beautiful ambient music where he tries to push Spot towards this family and he ends up drawing a circle around them, indicating that he's this new family. Oh my, it actually makes me well a lot.
Yeah, this film is a lot more sort of beautiful than I think most people do give it credit for. I think if you haven't watched this because you thought, oh, it just looks quite forgettable, I'd probably recommend going.
It's worth at least one viewing. I've only ever watched the movie all the way through twice in my life, and with other Pixar movies, I always rewatch them again and again, but with this one, I have no excuse whatsoever. Actually, now I think about it, I think part of the problem was to do with plot structure, really, because it's a fairly basic story where the main goal is just for Arlo and Spot to reunite with, just for Arlo to reunite with his family. And you can really feel that the movie just doesn't really know what to do with itself half the time. It's like they're just trying to find ways to fill in time before they eventually get to the ending, like Arlo and Spot become friends. Arlo and Spot find Dino with birds around him. Arlo and Spot meet T-Rex. Arlo and Spot meet raptors. They meet T-Rex again. They meet raptors again. Rinse and repeat, and then the movie ends.
That's
I can't dislike this movie because I think there's qualities to it. It's just that it's easily Pixar's most bland movie. Even with something like Brave, I can at least accept it a little bit more, if not for the fact that it's a very visually beautiful movie. Now, The Good Dinosaur is a very beautiful looking movie too. It has some of the most jaw-dropping backgrounds I've seen, but even Brave has a bit more of an identity to itself, even if it steals from Disney animation films.
Yeah, I think it's a case of, it is quite bland, but it's probably worth a watch if you haven't already. There is a fair bit here to like, but don't expect any. Just drop your expectations a bit, and you'll be fine.
I mean, it's not Pixar good, but it's better than 95% of the shit that's made by other animation studios nowadays anyway. So take it for what it's worth.
And hey, at least it's not Cars 2.
Yeah, that's like rock bottom.
Okay, should we move on to a better film?
Pixar sequel time.
Finding Dory.
I think Finding Nemo's a tad underrated, but I still agree with a lot of people that it's a genuinely beautiful movie with such a really strong message about father and son. I do like Finding Dory quite a bit, but unlike stuff like Toy Story 3 and Monsters University, I don't think this movie compares to Finding Nemo, but not to the same level that Cars 2 is to Cars 1.
Finding Dory is a very weird film. It's a film that really sort of tries to set Dory up as the main character and make her sort of short-term memory loss problems just shows the struggle of her short-term memory loss.
I get why a lot of people were really attached to Dory in Finding Nemo in the first place, because she was already a very funny character on her own. But if Finding Nemo also did anything, it's that it showed that there was so much more to Dory as a character, and how obviously with her short-term memory loss she finds a lot of things difficult in life, and she obviously grew an attachment to Marlin and Nemo, because they were able to accept her as who she was. And that's a very nice message, especially if people have other sort of disabilities or disorders or anything along those lines. And for a movie which is essentially placing the comic relief quote unquote as the main character, it's leaps and bounds above what Mater ever did, but at least I was very glad that they were able to tell a very touching storyline otherwise, especially as we learn more about her past, her parents, how she got lost from them, and how over time, especially when she eventually came to meet Marlin, how she basically completely forgot about them entirely, which, now that I think about it, is actually really damn dark.
This is probably one of the only films that does it right, the whole making your comic relief character the main character. It's not something that a lot of films can do right. Look at Minions for an example of that.
Kill me. But the way that I see it is that her character isn't entirely based on jokes. Yes, a lot of the humour of her character comes from how oblivious she is to her surroundings, and to be fair, they are actually genuinely funny when they want to be. But I'm at least glad that Pixar stuck to their guns and actually wanted to make sure that she stayed sympathetic, because Dory does go through quite a lot in this movie, especially when there are many moments where she's led to believe that her parents may or may not have been killed in a almost kind of a twist moment, which is again very dark, and there is still quite a lot to like about this movie.
I do really think that how they built Dory up as a character, and how she just doesn't know where her parents is or anything like that. It's a really, really very, 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 very beautiful story.
But now that I think about it, what I think sets Finding Dory back a little bit more from Finding Nemo is just how very derivative the whole movie sort of feels. Like, Finding Nemo was a story about a father trying to find his son. Finding Dory was about Dory trying to find her parents. Woo, originality. But I think some of that even comes down to some of the supporting cast, because with Finding Nemo, I remember a lot of these characters. I remember Crush, I remember the Tank Gang, I remember Bruce and the other sharks. They were all just sort of very memorable and fun characters. Finding Dory has some cool characters, like Dory's childhood friends. Like, one of them's a beluga whale. One of them, yeah, like, one of them's a beluga whale, I remember that. The other one, I can't remember, but I know she's short-sighted and all that. But that's sort of kind of the problem, and not a lot of the supporting cast is all that memorable. I think a new character they introduced named Hank the Septopus, I think, is a very fun character, and is delightfully cynical because he's played by Ed O'Neill, he's basically playing the same character that he does on Modern Family, which is always a very fun thing and a very funny thing. But I think that's sort of kind of the root of Finding Dory's problems, and it kind of does sort of make me think as to whether or not they made Finding Dory because they had a good story to tell, or if it's made just because a lot of people love Finding Nemo so much, and it's obviously struck a chord with a lot of people anyway, so I can see how it can work both ways.
It does sort of expand on things in the previous film as well, like how Dory learned how to speak whale.
That is actually quite funny and very charming too. Actually, a lot of the flashback sequences with her as a kid and her parents, I actually really do like how they were really handled now that I think about it, because I liked how, because obviously her parents know that she has short-term memory loss, they try to find many workarounds and many ways that, you know, Dory can still live a happy life and still fit in with all of the other kids and her friends back home. Like how they place seashells all over the place so she can still always find her way home if she wants to go out and play. How they always have to protect her from the undertow because that was what eventually got her caught in a current which got her separated from her parents. And even how Dory actually sees her parents breaking down because they just don't know how to handle Dory. I mean, I love how they approach that. I don't have too much to say regarding Finding Dory, honestly. It's the definition of what you see is what you get. I like a lot of the heartwarming elements to the story. I think in terms of a movie where the comic relief is the main character, I think it does it in the best way possible, and I think at this point it's probably going to be the only movie where a comic relief spin-off movie is actually going to work anyway. I think there's a lot of elements to it, but I think compared to Finding Nemo, it's nowhere near as good, but I'd still call it a good movie otherwise anyway.
I get you. I don't really have too much more to say about this either. So should we move on to Cars 3?
Yeah, sure, okay. I actually have a bit more to say about this one anyway.
Yeah, same. So this is a film about like enjoying things in life that you maybe wouldn't expect to enjoy earlier on. Maybe, you know, Lightning McQueen's getting old now. You know, there are more races taking the place. He's getting outdated.
I mean. If Cars 1 was about a rookie having to learn to accept and enjoy life, Cars 3, I am guessing, takes place far later into his career where he's considered an old man now because he now lives in a world where a lot more rookie racers are now starting to come in, and there are people with, you know, better abilities and are more technologically enhanced. A lot of these are electric cars rather than the regular gasoline automobile that Lightning McQueen is, and in many ways, Cars 3 is kind of a sports movie because it's about an old man trying to be better at his game in a world where a lot of younger people are starting to become better than him, which is one of these new characters in the form of Jackson Storm, the new villain of this movie. And you know what? In very similar ways to Cars 1, I think the movie works as well as Cars 1 on the same level that it's having to teach Lightning McQueen to sort of learn more new things about life, but at two completely different stages of his life. One of which in Cars 1, which was at the very beginning of his racing career, and the one in Cars 3, where he's reaching a point where people just don't really want him around anymore.
And I think in Cars 2, I think it was implied that Doc died, but in Cars 3, they basically just confirmed that, yeah, he's dead. Just quite dark and sad, really. But it sort of shows Lightning McQueen sort of taking the mantle of Doc and being what Doc was previously.
they brought Doc Hudson back through archive recordings that Paul Newman did, because even when he was Doc Hudson in Cars 1, he actually died shortly after that film came out, which also just makes this even more sad, honestly. But I actually really do respect that they actually really regarded Doc Hudson, because even though there was like a pretty decently poignant moment in Cars 2, which is probably honestly the best thing about Cars 2 now I think about it, it did feel like they were pushing it to the side with all the James Bond spy bullshit. But I'm at least glad Cars 3 decided to honour that.
But yeah, it does kind of show you maybe that there's other options available for you. If even if you're not maybe the racer you once were, there's still things you can do. You know, you can still train up a new rookie. You know, there's use your experience in that way.
I mean, I think one character that I think best presents that is actually a new character introduced, which is Cruz Ramirez, who is a very young car compared to Lightning McQueen, but was also assigned to basically train Lightning McQueen back up after a pretty disturbing crash scene in the very early on in the film. And if we learn anything about Cruz as a character during the movie, it's that she wanted to be a racer just like Lightning McQueen, but because of her build as a car and, you know, other things, she just never had the opportunity. So in many ways, there's sort of an emotional connection between her and Lightning McQueen, because they're both kind of after the same thing. It's just that because Lightning is obviously a car that's built for racing, he has such a better shot at it other than Cruz, who has the knowledge and the skills to become one, but just doesn't have quite the same build, I guess you could say.
I think really this film sort of cements, you know, as one I really, really like. It sort of cements itself when at the end he sort of gives up his number. They spray paint onto Cruz, and then Cruz finishes the race for him. I kind of thought, you know, if Lightning McQueen wins this race, it kind of defeats the entire purpose of the film. But the fact that he didn't, it's a decision I can respect Pixar for making.
It was actually a decision that Pixar nearly went with, because the original ending had just Lightning McQueen win the race, and the film's director Ryan Fee and a lot of the other people at Pixar felt that the ending felt very unfulfilling for what they were going for. So I do like what they did with the ending, with basically letting Cruz finish the race. So it's basically a team effort between them, because not only do I think it actually says a lot about what Lightning McQueen learned about Cruz and that other people just don't see in her, and how she obviously wants to go out there and race and all that, but in many ways, with the movie ending with Lightning McQueen deciding to train Cruz as a racer, it beautifully mirrors that same relationship that Lightning McQueen had with Doc Hudson. So seeing what Lightning learned from Doc and actually placing it into teaching Cruz to be a racer from here on out, I mean, you know what? I think this is leaps and bounds above even Cars 1 to an extent.
Yeah, I can see that. I just kind of think also that that part when Lightning was told Doc's best moments weren't when he was racing, it was when he was training you, was a genuinely not really, really well done scene.
That is actually a really beautifully done scene. There's actually a lot of really, really good scenes in this movie. Even, like, when I compare it to Cars 1, I'll say even this, like, I think the movie works in a lot of the same ways that Cars 1 does, but I think it's a lot better paced this time around. It feels like it's never too fast, but never too slow either. It never feels like Cars 1, where it starts off super fast, then it screeches to an absolute stop once we enter Radiator Springs, and it just sort of slowly climbs its way back up until the final race. It feels like with Cars 3, Pixar now have a better understanding of what works about cars now. So I like how they were able to still, you know, keep the plot interesting and still try out new things, but at the same time just make it a bit more interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very well done film. It's just in general, really.
The only major criticism I can think of that I have of the movie is just with the villain Jackson Storm. He's just like all of the other racers, except I guess Lightning has a bit of a vendetta against him. He's just a boring one-dimensional character that appears at the beginning and then appears right at the end. Nothing more, nothing less. He's lame as hell.
I think it's just literally because he's winning all the races and Lightning is just like, yeah, that used to be me and stuff. And yeah, it does sort of show Lightning going through this whole journey that Doc went through, and I do love this film for that.
I mean, I don't think this movie actually gets enough credit for what it's worth. I mean, does this movie kind of tell similar messages and that we've seen in other movies before? Sure. And to be fair, it isn't that much better than Cars 1. It's just that it has a bit of better pacing to it. But Cars 3 is my favourite Cars movie, not necessarily a favourite Pixar movie by a stretch, but just like Cars 1, there is a lot to appreciate here, and I don't think that it has been given enough credit for what it's worth, because it's hard to not look at Cars and just see it as a franchise made to sell toys, which it is. But, you know, when a movie does something right, you gotta give it praise, and with Cars 3, I've gotta give it praise.
That's the thing, like, Cars 1 and 3, I mean, obviously not Cars 2, but Cars 1 and 3, I think are genuinely really solid films, and I do think they don't get any credit, but they deserve some, because, like, genuinely, I think Cars 3 is very underrated. I think if anyone just hasn't seen it, definitely go and watch it.
I like it a lot.
So, should we move on to Coco?
You know what? I actually felt really happy of Coco's existence, because it's Pixar going back to doing another original project again. But at the same time, I don't think this movie had enough credit that it deserved before it even came out, because a lot of people were very stingy towards Coco because it was a film tackling Mexican culture in Dia de los Muertos, but another animated film came out 3 years ago that tackled basically a lot of the same stuff, which was The Book of Life. I don't think it's a fair comparison. I think The Book of Life is a good movie, but Coco trumps it in almost every single way. And you know what? I'm glad that it still came out a beautiful film in the end.
Yeah, I think there's a few parallels with the poster or the trailer, I think it was. But if you really look at it, it's like both films side by side. They're not alike. They're really not.
No, they're not. I mean, they are based in similar themes and settings, and to be fair, both films are about musicians wanting to be musicians and families that don't want them to be musicians. But I think Coco's message is more obviously about, you know, appreciation of who your family is, rather than The Book of Life mostly just being a basic love story. But I think that's just what makes Coco a better film, because what really makes the movie work so unbelievably well is what it says about family and family history, and how, you know, traditions and holidays based on your own cultures bring your family together. I think there is a lot to take from this movie in multiple different ways, really.
I think one really beautiful part of the film is obviously when he's in with who he learns to be his great granddad, I think it was, and learn that the song that got like really huge there was really made by him, and it was made for his great grandmother Coco.
That is such a beautiful moment. It's that scene when they were in the pit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's so beautifully, even the flashback moment where it literally turns into this really brownish old filmic tint, and I think that's what really makes Coco work. It's essentially a film about what your family means to people and how it works, because in context of the story, Miguel obviously wants to be a musician just like his old Ernesto de la Cruz, but their family doesn't want that, because their old ancestor in their family, who was actually revealed to be Hector, was actually abandoned their family to be a musician, or so they thought. We'll get to that in a minute. But you can see where the family's coming from with him not wanting him to be a musician, but you can tell that they still sort of care for him. They do all of these mean-spirited things out of love more than anything else, if you kind of catch my drift.
Yeah.
So in many ways, when Miguel enters the land of the dead and he starts to uncover a lot of the family history, it's a film that teaches you to appreciate your family, but not also let go out of what you love either.
They really sort of want the best
out of him, yeah. But that's what works the most about it, and that's even linked to Ernesto de la Cruz. I hate to talk about Ernesto because it's a Pixar twist villain again, but I loved his character in the movie, because even though his reveal was a touch predictable, more so than I think with most of the Pixar villains, and obviously how I think the way that the whole his villainous acts sort of link into how he actually killed Hector out of wanting to basically use his songs and continue his career because Hector was missing his family and wanted to go back. But you also have to remember that because he ended up killing Hector, that meant Miguel's family was led to believe that he just never returned, which is why they obviously became shoemakers and why his family have always had this huge disdain towards music. And one line from Ernesto de la Cruz, which actually sends shivers up my spine now, is when Ernesto actually reveals his villainous ways to Miguel, and he says, you know, you gotta do what it takes to seize your moment.
There's a lot about this film that really just makes you surprised. But I'm just gonna say right now, there's the twist that Hector was the great granddad is one I saw coming a mile off.
Really? I didn't.
No, genuinely, like from the moment that he like sort of reappeared, it just kind of to me was like he's gonna be the one, isn't he? He's gonna be the great grandfather.
I suppose that's the only major criticism I think anybody can have with Coco, and why I don't put it in like my top 5 Pixar films. I agree that it's a near fantastic movie in practically every way possible, but I think the biggest problem is just that it's a very predictable story. It's a story that means a lot and is a very important one and actually teaches you a lot about appreciating your family, but it does take a ton of predictable beats to get there, from how Miguel just wants to play music and how he ends up kind of being a bit of a selfish brat towards Hector in the Land of the Dead, and how he actually learns a lot about his family history and all that sort of stuff. Once things start falling into place, you know exactly where things are going to go. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think the reason these story choices were made was obviously because it tells us a lot about the characters and the world we live in, and it also tells us a lot about the message at its core, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still predictable.
It is very, very predictable. There's a lot of elements in this film that you come a mile off because it's just been done a million times before, like Ernesto being the twist villain, as it were. But the way I see Coco is it takes a lot of cliches and stuff, and it does them all well.
Yeah.
It does a lot of things that were taken and done before, just over and over again, but it does it well.
I think it's also just a really good thing that they actually decided to use the Land of the Dead as a way to convey such themes, because the Land of the Dead is already sort of a very intriguing concept on its own, considering its Mexican traditions and how people see it as this place where their ancestors can stay as long as they remember them, which does lead to a lot of dark and even emotional moments when you have to come to the realization that once people in the living world completely forget about you, you're disappearing from that world for good, which is a really dark thing to discuss. But it's also a really good idea because it also lets Miguel reunite with a lot of his own ancestors, including his grandmother, his great-great-grandmother, who was a Melder. And you know, I think it's a good way to tell the story, especially about family, because it is about learning from who your ancestors were and how they can help you later down in life. And even the way that the Land of the Dead was created, like, it's probably the most visually stunning Pixar movie ever created, because the way that they were able to build the Land of the Dead with all these extravagant colors, and even the way that they built the skeleton, like the Land of the Dead skeletons, like they could have made the skeletons look really good or really creepy, but I think Pixar managed to find a really good way of making the characters look like the Mexican skeletons from Dia de los Muertos, but at the same time still make them look visually appealing enough where it never feels at all really distracting.
Yeah, I think the design of the skeletons is really good. I think just the general character design in general in Coco is just fantastic. I do genuinely love the how they've done the Land of the Dead as well. It's just it just looks so beautiful, and
you can tell that there was a lot of time and effort put into it. I remember seeing something that Pixar made, and they actually had a really difficult time trying to animate the skeletons, because with a lot of their other characters, they could always sort of rely on skin and, you know, muscle to try and make the characters look as authentic as they can. But when you just have bones to work with, it's very difficult to make it look authentic. And that goes the same with how they had to animate their clothes and how it was supposed to lay on their bodies. Like, it was probably, I think, according to Pixar, it was probably one of the biggest challenges of their entire company. It's just trying to make the skeletons look good.
I can see that, really. But I think they've succeeded for the most part.
But yeah, I don't have too much else to say about Coco. It's a film that I felt was needed from Pixar after all of these Pixar sequels that we've been getting, and it feels refreshing and in a good way. I love its world building, I love its characters, I love its message, and I think that since it's obviously a message about family, I think unlike more Pixar films, I think it has a message that a lot of people can connect to just a little bit more. Even something like Inside Out, Out, which is telling a message that's a tiny bit more on the niche side, but I think still works on a bit of a much better level anyway. I think its predictability kind of takes it away from being the best of the best, but you still can't say not for a fact that it's still a near fantastic film anyway.
Yeah, but can we just talk about how we didn't get it until like really January of 2018?
Oh my god, we always sort of had Pixar films get delayed around here because I get that, during summer releases, movie theaters here want to take advantage of UK school holidays and all that. I kind of get that, but with Coco, which was a holiday release that came out at the time it came out because they obviously wanted to take advantage of the Academy Awards, they had no excuse to delay this movie, and it also didn't help that the audience we actually saw the movie with was actually a pack of assholes.
That was pretty bad, I remember that.
Oh god. Go see Coco, but watch it at home, not at a cinema. Please don't.
I think that really that probably hurt it, as well as the fact that the cinemas were marketing Olaf's Frozen Adventure over this film.
Oh god, I love Pixar shorts, but why did they decide to put in a TV special from Disney Animation in front of this?
Like, it's half an hour long almost as well, so man, that's not a short.
I would have not watched this movie again in theaters if they did not decide to show that short here in the UK. So if the delay from November to January did a good thing, is that it actually gave Disney the hint to not play that.
Yep, that's a good thing. I do want to talk about Incredibles 2, but not in a whole lot of detail because we've got something planned for this. But for right now, let's just talk very briefly about Incredibles 2.
I'll say this, just to put it short and brief, I love the movie. I think when you compare it to the first Incredibles, it almost lives up to the exact same quality that movie did. I still think that the family dynamic's really strong. I still think it's impeccably well written. I think it's beautifully animated. I love how the Pixar sequels always show changes and upgrades in the animation quality, so it just ends up looking even more vibrant and beautiful. I still love the character designs that's seen so much in Brad Bird films, but on such great lengths. I do like the screenslaver. I think I'm going to call it an it for now because it's meant to be a twist. I think it's a good villain and it has good motivations. Compared to Syndrome, I don't think it quite compares, and I do think the film can be a tad derivative at points. But in terms of Pixar sequels, it's easily my favourite. Well, it's probably my second favourite, just behind Toy Story 2, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still a high quality film in practically every way possible. It's everything that I really wanted to hope I could see out of this movie.
I saw this film twice in one day because it was just that good. I think that sort of speaks volumes about just how good this film really is. But yeah, there's not a whole lot we really can say. We will be doing a separate thing with Incredibles in, so keep an eye out for that in the near future. But yeah, for right now, I think really we just got to talk about what do you really think the future holds for Pixar? Because obviously now that John Lasseter has gone from the company, and we got Toy Story 4 on the way, as well as a few more, just a few more original projects. I'm just not sure. What do you really think?
For me personally, I'm quite hopeful. I'm actually sort of glad that John Lasseter's out, because even though he has contributed so much to not just Pixar but what we see in animation today, it is starting to become a bit more apparent that his thought process and the way that he's handled Pixar has become a bit more negative as of late. Not from a creative standpoint, I think from that he's actually done a really good job, but just in sort of the fact that there's obviously been a lot of claims of sexual harassment and how a lot of the female employees at Pixar felt a bit discriminative at the company, which kind of frankly is pretty disgusting now I think about it. But I'm kind of glad that he's out now. I think he's done everything he could have done for the 30 years he's been at Pixar. I'm happy that Pete Docter's actually the new leader. Considering he did Monsters Inc. up and Inside Out, I think he has the right thought process to actually handle Pixar as good as it can get, because he shows that he's a very creative filmmaker, but at the same time he just knows what makes a good story when he sees it. So I'm glad he's in. I'm glad John Lasseter's out now, even though I am quite thankful of what he's done. In terms of upcoming projects, in terms of Toy Story 4, we'll see. I mean, I am not really looking forward to it because I think the concept behind Toy Story 4 is kind of pointless. But I hear that a lot of the other projects after that are meant to be original projects, and I know Dan Scanlon, who was the director of Monsters University, is actually making an original fantasy movie at Pixar right now, so we'll see what happens with that. I don't really know what much of the future is going to hold for the company. company, but considering that it's now under new and reliable leadership and we have more original projects on the horizon guaranteed, I think there's still a lot of stuff to look forward to.
I'm really gonna have to hope for the best for Pixar. They've done largely a very, very good job of making films, and I am quite hopeful to see what they do come out with in the future. I think for Toy Story 4, I'm not entirely sure what they're going to do, because in my mind, really, Andy's out, so and it really wraps up very nicely, so I don't quite know what they're going to do for Toy Story 4. But
I'm gonna have a little bit of faith, because I know for a fact that they're making the movie out of having a good idea for it anyway. So again, I think it's just the case of we're just gonna have to wait and see. But
and I think they really didn't they like sort of announce Toy Story 4 just after Toy Story 3 or something, because that it just...
I mean, no, they didn't. Toy Story 4 was only announced about 3 years ago at D23.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I don't know.
But then again, D23 I think is only like a couple of months away, I believe. No. I think D23 is going to be in a year or so. So once Toy Story 4 opens up and it's out into the public, I think that's when we're going to finally know of what many of these new projects from Pixar are going to be. And that's probably going to be the same for stuff like what Lucasfilm's working on and what the team at Kevin Feige and the Marvel Cinematic Universe are doing. It's all really an exciting time now I think about it. It's very open where Pixar could go from here, and I think that's in a good way, really. All I can really say is I like the Pixar sequels, but calm down with them a little bit now. We've had Incredibles 2 and I've had my fill for now.
So that probably is gonna have to do it, because we've been recording for some time now.
Yeah, very long.
Okay. So I'll just have to wrap up really by saying the last one we did have to fight some legal battles with. That's all sorted now.
I always thought that Nintendo were the biggest copyright Nazis, but no, Disney takes the cake.
They did back down after I filed the claim, so it's probably just a YouTube content ID bot. Yeah. Hopefully that doesn't happen this time. We'll have to see if it does. But yeah, and also the E3 podcast is going to come out sooner or later. Is it going to be worth it? Probably not, but watch it anyway, because we spent time on it.
Oh boy. Yep, I suppose that's it.
Yeah, that's it. So until next time, I've been Ned.
I'm Kyle. Thank you and good night, my peeps.
Yeah, we'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.